Masculinity has become radioactive. It's one of the most polarizing forces in modern culture. Families fracture over it, politics feed on it, entire online ecosystems monetize it, and no one seems to agree on what it is anymore. If you're a woman, you may feel fatigue from the patterns that don't seem to change. And if you're a man, you may feel disoriented, pulled between two extremes, told you're dangerous if you're strong, told you're weak if you're sensitive, unsure whether to soften or to harden. For a moment, the phrase toxic masculinity seemed like progress and named real harm. But critique without construction creates a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay empty. When masculinity was dismantled without being rebuilt, something predictable happened. The pendulum swung back. The loudest voices reclaimed the conversation, and they're charismatic, certain, and unapologetic, offering simple frameworks for a complicated world, promising power in a moment that feels humiliating, promising a way to fight back against a world that many men feel is turning against them. And men of every age have been drawn into this, not because they're villains, but because they're searching for something solid, something grounded, something they can embody. So the question isn't whether masculinity is broken, it's whether we can define it and live it in a way that strengthens men, honors women, and becomes a healing force in the world. And if there's anyone who could speak into this moment, it's Terry Crews. For more than 2 decades, he's been one of the most recognizable figures in Hollywood, the star of action franchises like The Expendables, a physique that has become synonymous with strength. More than 55 million followers watching his every move. By every cultural measure, he is the prototype, the strong man. But what makes Terry different is he didn't just perform masculinity. He lived its extremes, the rage, the control, the caricature of toughness. And then he dismantled it. He spent the last decade confronting what masculinity actually is. And if masculinity is going to be rebuilt, it won't be rebuilt in theory. It will be rebuilt by men who've embodied it and offer a better story. The cameras have followed Terry Crews for years. This conversation is about what happened when the cameras were off. So let's begin. So Terry, I want to start at the very beginning of your story, before the fame, the physique, before anything else. In your memoir, you wrote about a moment when you were a kid and you kissed your dad on the cheek. So can you take us back there and tell us what happened?
Yeah. I grew up in Flint, Michigan. I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 1968. And so the 70s in Flint was a weird, it's just strange time, because Flint right now is a shell of a city, whereas before it was very, very successful and booming. General Motors was the number one corporation in the world. People were making a lot of money. My father worked for Buick. He had moved all the way up from a small town in Georgia, Edison, Georgia, to work in the factories in Flint. Met my mother there. I like to tell people sometimes, if it wasn't for, General Motors, I wouldn't exist. A lot of people from the South made that pilgrimage for a better life.
Yeah.
And he made it, and he was a foreman, which was different than the rest of the kind of what you would say the workers, because he was kind of in between, the management and then the workers. And it led to a lot of difficulty, because he wasn't quite accepted by either one. And I think my father got disillusioned a little bit. And he was drink. He would go, after he left work, he would go to the bar, he would have beers in his car and the whole thing. And he was an alcoholic, but you have to understand, back in that time, there really wasn't a definition of alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
If you were either, if you could work, they would say you don't have a problem. Now, if you lost your job, you were a wino. That was the whole, the conceit back then. But my father, he would come home and he would drink and he would play sad music and just sit there, and you just see him in this. I'll never forget when that incident happened. I'd walked in on him and he was listening to some really sad soul music. And he was just sitting there, and I had so much empathy. I just looked at him like, wow, what he looks, he just looks so pitiful at the moment. And even in my little young heart, I was going, I got to make him feel better. Like, why is he so sad? And I walked over to him. I'll never forget. And I just, he's a huge man, and I put my I put my hands on his shoulder, climbed up and kissed him on the cheek, just to like let him know I loved him, and, whatever he was feeling, it was going to be okay. I just felt that need to do that. And he looked at me with a look of extreme disgust, is the way I could describe it. And I'll never forgot that. Like, it was like I had an eye in the middle of my forehead. It looked at me like I was deformed. And I felt ugly, and I felt shame immediately. Like I had done something wrong. Like I had stepped across the line, and he looked at me like, what are you doing? And he didn't say anything, but it was the look. And it wasn't like, oh, come here. And it wasn't followed by a hug or a kiss back or anything. It wasn't reciprocated at all. And I was like, whoa, like, all right, I'll never do that again. You know what I mean? It was the moment I was vulnerable, and to have that shut down immediately like that, I never did that again. Like, I decided I had to be cold with him. Like, you can't, I'll never again show that kind of weakness, and you sometimes you look at parts of your life and you wonder why they're so pivotal, but it's because you remember it. Just that memory stands out in day glow, and you say that was a moment. Those are the things that you say, okay, that defined me. It was unforgettable, and it determined the course of a lot of the direction I was going to go for a lot of years after that.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly just popped out on the page to me when I read that, because I feel like that story, I feel like a lot of men have probably at some level internalize social cues or things, whether their friends, their family, about how to behave and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. In that moment, like, it seems like there wasn't even words happening. And so when you look back now, what did it teach you about being a man?
Well, it definitely taught me that empathy, vulnerability, transparency is not accepted. You had to be cold. And there was a cool coldness. I mean, even the concept of being cool was to not show emotion. And that was in the 70s. That's what it was all about. Looking back now, I could see how a lot of the men that I was around, including my father, they were caricatures of a movement, which was, and I grew up in an African American household and neighborhood, and my part of the city, that's the only part of the city I knew. With Flint, there was the white Flint and there was the black Flint. And we used to have white neighbors when I was very little, and then they slowly all left. It was white flight happened as, more black people came into the city. It just kind of, my neighborhood slowly turned all black. And I saw the men at the time, I just thought this is who they were, but now looking back, you can see they were caricatures of like this blaxploitation stuff, that was, Superfly and the Mac and movies and culture, even Richard Pryor at the time. There were a lot of people who mimicked the way he talked, lots of cussing, lots of, this. I mean, just the cadence was even like a Richard Pryor stand up. You go to the barbershop and everybody was talking the same way, and you felt like they were channeling a movie. And I just thought that's how it was. But like I said, looking back in hindsight, you see like, man, they didn't even know who they were. And I felt like they were trying to figure out what it was to be a man as well. And, in that world that I was in, it was all about conquest of women. So a lot of it was talked about, just how many women you could sleep with and how many girlfriends you had and it was the Mac. It was, you were a pimp, basically.
Yeah.
And how many women you could control. Another thing about that time and period was that my father and many of the men that I saw in the community didn't look at themselves as having a family. You owned a family, which is a completely different mindset.
Yeah.
That was a very authoritarian mindset where everyone obeyed the man of the house, and you were shamed by other men if anyone if anyone disagreed with you from your family. They were like, hey man, you better get your family in check. Get your girl in check, get your kids in check. You had to have everybody in control. Which, looking back now, again, in hindsight, you say that is impossible.
Yeah.
Like, controlling other people is the wrong way to do things. Coercion is not leadership, but that was the world that I lived in. And that's the stuff that I picked up. That's the stuff I learned, because you think, for me, you think you do what you know. You do what you have information, you do what you know, but you never, ever, ever do what your knowledge tells you. It's literally custom, precedent, and habit. This is how you can really know something's wrong, but do the completely opposite, and then do it anyway, because these are habits.
Yeah.
These are customs. And we lived by that. And that was my upbringing. And then, coupled with the extreme religious nature, my mother's, her side, she was extremely religious. So there were those customs on my father's side, and then there was the customs and precedents and habits on my mother's side, which were all extreme, very, very extreme ways to be.
The phrase that came up in my head as you're speaking is there's nothing new under the sun. And it's funny because as you speak, it's like from the 70s, what you're talking about, all the way up to maybe like 10, 12 years ago, like you have a predominant pattern with like, that's what masculinity is. And so it seemed like about 10, 12 years ago, a frustration kind of boiled over. And then, obviously women being deeply unsettled by men's behavior. So then you had this emergence of this word, toxic masculinity.
That's right.
And I think that there were patterns being named there that were real harm. When you hear that phrase, what do you think people were actually reacting to in that moment?
I think that what we're talking about is, here's the thing. Men have done a lot of wrong things. And so to deal with that, there's two ways to deal with it, because there's a lot of shame involved. They know when it's almost like, deep down, truly believe that we all have a subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And you know when you're getting over on people. You know when you've cheated someone. You know when you've lied. But you can fool yourself into thinking, well, you know, I had to do what I had to do. And this is the conceit that a lot of men that I knew growing up felt like, you know, I knew the people that I was around knew the only way to get rich was to do something crooked. That's their mindset. They didn't think, okay, actually serve people and be, you know, give people what they need and let that kind of fuel your wealth or whatever happens to you. It was more like a pawn shop, you know, the hustler's mentality where you need to be tricked and I need to be this person that tricks you. And that worked with the women, that worked with the people you worked with. It was all a game that the smartest person who outsmarted everyone was the richest. And that was the thing people bought into. And when you talk about toxic masculinity, you know, you're talking about people who, let's say, and it's a perfect example I have of this stuff is where, you know, you have rules. Let's say you own a restaurant. You have all these rules where, you know, you have to wash your hands before you go back to work. You know, all the workers in the place have to wash their hands. And it's totally understandable because you don't want people to get sick and all this stuff, right? But the owner comes in, he's in the kitchen, does his things, he's touching things, whatever, goes to the restroom, and the people that are in the restroom see him, and he doesn't wash his hands. He walks right back out. So the people you work with are like, but we know the rules, and you're the boss. This is your place. But should we confront him about this? Should we? I don't know. I saw him. He walked right out. Now we have a problem. Because now you're dealing with, okay, do we confront him about this? Or how, and if you do, what happens? So one person speaks up. He says, hey man, you didn't wash your hands. I noticed this, sir. And the guy gets fired. And everyone learns immediately. You do not bring this up with this guy. You don't ever confront him about anything he's doing. And the toxicity of that makes a horrible, horrible environment where, you know, and this is what the one thing I believe, because again, the boss at the moment was shamed. He probably felt ashamed, probably felt embarrassed, and immediately cut this guy out because it's your fault. You're out of here. I don't ever want to be confronted like that again. This is when we're talking about toxicity, where the rules don't apply, you know? And so there's a couple ways to get rid of shame for me. When you have been shamed, you know, you have to apologize. And a lot of times you have to forgive yourself. But when you're talking about toxicity is excusing yourself. That's a whole different thing. When you excuse yourself, when you give yourself all the leeway in the world, and yet you're harder on everybody else. This is what everyone's picked up. Because there were a lot of men who were hard on everybody else, yet excused themselves, not forgive themselves. Because when you forgive yourself, it's easier to forgive other people.
Yeah.
But when you excuse yourself, that actually makes you harder on everybody around you. And you don't accept excuses from anyone else but you. And everybody for a long, long time lived like that. Because we all saw it. This guy is not, hey, this dude, he cheated. Okay. I mean, you're talking about from sports to business to everything. You see people who are absolutely cheating and didn't want to get called out on it, yet called everybody else out on their stuff. That is the essence of what I would call what became known as toxic masculinity. And I'm talking about men. I'm sure there are women who do all this stuff, and I'm sure there's all that stuff, but all I know is, and all I can really speak on is who I am and what I experienced as a man. And they had every right to call that out. I called it out. And I was one of them, to be honest with you. There were so many times when I picked that up and I would totally excuse myself, but I was hard on everybody around me. So I know what that feels like. I know exactly what it feels like. I know exactly how it helps you deal with your shame for the time being, but it comes back in spades.
Yeah, I think the nothing new under the sun part is, I think what you're describing, there was a moment where I at some level I feel like men were listening, or men couldn't run from that anymore, that reality that you were painting. I mean, there's a huge power differential that is in that story, and that were people experiencing of how do you hold people accountable.
Right.
And so, and then I think if you've said this in I'm not sure if your book or other interview, but it does seem like that term for some, especially men, became white noise or stopped landing at some point. So why do you feel like that to be the case?
Well, I think it's a reaction. You know, the embarrassment of being confronted. Remember, let's go back to the story about the boss. The boss is confronted. It might have been privately, but he couldn't handle he couldn't handle how right his employee was, you know? And when everyone saw this guy pack his bags and be fired for confronting the boss. So when you're talking about the embarrassment of this, there is a reaction. Now I want to say this too, because there's a way to deal with people that I've learned over the years that can help with this kind of thing. Again, some people, it doesn't, I remember being so angry at people for calling me out on my stuff that it may not have worked. However, the few times it did work, I've seen where someone had corrected me without criticizing me. When I say that, a lot of times people have been correcting, and then they follow up with criticism, which makes men defensive. And now you got the man verse, you know what I mean? Which makes a bunch of defensive men who are like, hey, who are embarrassed, first of all, but now you've gone into a whole nother realm where you have excused yourself. You feel the criticism is unwarranted, because it's very, very hard to correct without criticism.
Yeah.
It's always tips a little bit because people feel criticized. And I think that especially when you see how loosely the term is thrown around about toxic masculinity, and it's added to tons of criticism. And it's a thing where the men can grab a hold of all of this and go, well, what's the use? You know what I mean? I'm just a man, and now you're talking being a man is toxic, and you see how it just bends and twists into something else. It's almost a reaction to I have to say this. I came up in a very religious household.
Yeah. And
you can see where religion is all about correction and criticism at the same time. And man, it all of a sudden people have to be like, well, who can ever go to heaven? Who can ever be because it's just, you feel useless. You
Yeah.
feel like I can't ever
That's a good parallel.
reach the point you're talking about. And that's where a lot of men feel. They feel like, you want me to be perfect? And that's not that's not the intention, but that's what you hear. And see that, and I think that the only way to really, really address any problem, like even Einstein said, like the art of solving a problem is defining it. And when the words get thrown around loosely, you're losing definitions. Like there's times you lose definitions of so many words because people are now just throwing it around to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore. You know what I mean? And I think we need to get back to accurately defining what we mean. But the language is a very, very powerful thing. The things you say, the things that you mean, everything is taken out of context right now. So you can throw these things around and have people just, it can get really confusing. And so as a way to clear this up, what is the manosphere, the guys who just totally just reacted, where now, we hate women. Women are the enemy. Because we can't possibly live up to the things you're saying or whatever we do. In fact, what about you? And then it'll never end. I always like to say this too, when you're talking about accountability, it would have been different had another boss of another business caught the boss of that business coming out of the bathroom. He's like, hey man, you got to wash your hands for your employees.
Up here, yeah.
And when I say this, it's like men need to hold other men accountable. And bosses have to hold other bosses accountable. There has to be this accountability, but it has to come from a level where I can look you in the face and we have to look at each other and we have the same experiences. Yeah. And we know this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tragic parts of that cultural moment is like, so you have all this behavior, your generation, and then leading up, and then you have Me Too, and then I think it was just such a perfect articulation that you had there, because I guess men were listening for a moment, and then over the past 5-6 years saying, I can't be what you want me to be, or I don't identify with what you want me to be, right. And I'm going to swing back, and I'm going to swing back hard, yep. And that's when you get like flag bearers like, I don't know, Andrew Tate and other people like that. Where you have this whole kind of man verse on Twitter, yep. And it's big. It's like really big, and it's almost like it's weird because the principles that you were talking about in the 70s, it's almost like reclaiming those as like proper and true in some sort of way, yep. And doubling down on the tough man mentality and doubling down on the world's out to get you. And so when you look at that, when you look at a figure like Andrew Tate, even like, what do you think young men are so compelled by when they're hearing these messages that it's growing to be so big?
Well, I mean, it's I look at it. I mean, I remember when I came out when I joined the whole Me Too movement about what happened to me in my experience. That world called me a cuck. They were like, he's, and I was confronting actual attitudes that have been wrong for a long time that I had. Wait, I wasn't pointing at anybody else. I'm saying, yo, this is me. Like, I remember when I was in the NFL and we would go to a strip club, and you go to the strip club and the woman's on the stage, and then all of a sudden she comes off the stage and she wants to sit with the players and start talking. And she's talking about kids and family and different stuff. And we're like, hey, stop. You're like, ugh, get out of here. And the reason why is because she was becoming a full-fledged human before our eyes. And it was like, get back and become a picture. get back up there and become this image. Like, we don't want to hear you talk. We don't want to know you have feelings. We don't want to know anything about you as a person, like because you're not really human. And that was the thing. I even addressed this. I said it was the thing where I felt like, even the things that you would say to me, there were things my wife would say, and I just couldn't hear her because I didn't see her as an equal. I saw her as, well, yeah, you don't understand. I'd rolled my eyes. I lost my empathy. And when I saw that, and I called myself on these mindsets, it shocked me. It shocked me. I was like, I'm not seeing her as a person. And, I was addicted to pornography for years, and I think that contributed because you don't see, you're just looking at body parts. You're not seeing people as full-fledged human beings. And people argue with me, and they'll say, oh yeah, well, porn is one thing. And, anybody who has ever used it, if you're over 18, it's fine. But for me, I was like, I don't know anybody that discovered porn at 18.
Yeah.
I was 9. It changed the way I thought about human beings. I was like, they're so beautiful. Oh my goodness. And they could say something, but I'm looking at body parts. You're an object. You're not, and even if they were, and this is another thing too, when you look at pornography, you talk about consent, and everyone says, no means no. But in pornography, no always means yes. Always. What are we learning? Even if she says no, that's the start of a porn movie. That's the start of action. And remember, I told you, you don't do what you know. You just do what is custom, what's precedent, what's habit. And when you have a habit of treating women this way, you have a habit, especially when they talk and when they tell you they're hurting, they tell you this is not right, you're not listening. And I was that guy. And once I started to really say these things, like, oh my God, and I was accused of being a covert, and trying to impress women this way and the whole thing. But I was rebuilding my life. I was rebuilding a relationship with the one woman that meant everything to me, which is my wife, Rebecca. And I had determined that I would never, ever go back. That's one reason why I went public. For me, it was like burning my boats. It was like, I'll never return to that mentality because, and this is where I was, I was so ashamed. So ashamed of the way I behaved and the way I talked. And it was to fit in with people that I didn't even like. You see, that's the cruel irony, was that I didn't even want to be like you guys. I don't even like you guys. But in order to fit in, I submitted myself. I submitted just that mentality because that was the way, it was considered cool. It was considered, now you're right. The Marlboro Man is a perfect example where he's alone, he's walking off into the distance, no wife, no kids, nobody, and he dies alone. But that's how you want to do it. The end of the movie, he did it his way. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be by myself. I realized, I said, being alone it hurts. being alone is terrible. I never wanted to be this person. And I was there. And I had to get out. Or I was going to die. I just knew I wouldn't be here.
There's some major themes in what I hear you speaking about. There's shame is such a big piece. Belonging is another piece, which you just mentioned. Is there also an issue of truth? Because at some level, like even your own story, did you genuinely believe this is that way that things are? And is there an aspect of this of people being convinced that this is the way to live the good life?
I thought it was true. I did think it was true. I mean, when I say being this man, this dude, I believed that this was the way to be successful. And I was successful. Actually, I was very successful in all those worlds. I mean, athlete, I was an athlete. I had built my body into this thing that people could admire and had been, this kind of guy. But the thing is, what didn't add up is when my wife was like, it's over. And I was like, but that's not how this is supposed to go. I had 1 + 1 = this. And it was something totally different. I was like, in fact, I'm ended up on the negative. And I'm going to be real, man. When my wife initially said it was over, I looked at her as weak. That was the initial, I was like, all right, you know what? You can't handle it. Fine. Because I initially took the manosphere approach, whereas like, you know what? I'll just find another woman who can handle who I am. Again.
So common.
Excuses. I decided to excuse myself immediately. That was the moment. And then all of a sudden I heard myself talk that way. And then there was a question that hit me in my head. It was like, you know what, Terry? Maybe it's you. I was like, no. No way. It can't be me. There's no way it's me. First of all, look where I came up. Look at all the things I've done, all the obstacles I had to fight. I had all these things there was excuses all day. I was black, I was poor, I was this, and look how far I had to go, and everything I to get me to this place I needed. You see, it's obvious. I'm here. I did everything I needed to do. And all those excuses were valid. That's the issue. The excuses work. That you can't say they don't exist. But the moment I realized that it was really me, like I was responsible for everything good in my life or everything bad in my life. So what I would do is take the claim for the good, and then all the bad was everybody else. But no, the bad was me too. And once I cracked that egg, I was like, oh shit. Like I couldn't close it back up. I mean, I had goo all over my hand. I was like, uh-oh. And I realized it wasn't my wife. And the question went from, why doesn't she believe me? Damn, why does she not believe me? Then the question switched. Why am I lying? Two different, like it was night and day. Why am I lying to her? That's me. It shifted. You don't believe me is on you. But why am I lying? It's now responsibility is all me. And I was lying. I was lying to everybody to keep up this image, to keep up the look, to keep up what everybody thought. And then when my wife said she's gone, she's out, it was over, I didn't care about the image anymore. Because Hollywood doesn't care if you lose your family. They didn't care. They didn't care at all. It was like, hey, now you can do 3 movies in a row. I was like, but who cares? And that was a wake-up call. It was the best. Well, they say it was the worst and best day of my life simultaneously.
There's so many just profound things that you just said there. I think the 1 + 1 = 2 thing is very fascinating to me, because a lot of people follow that logic of like, if I do this, it's going to lead to this. And in fact, that's a lot of the messaging that is portrayed today. Like you have these online schools, and you have all these things that are happening. And if you just do this, or you just get to this position of power and wealth, and you have everything in your control, and you have all the women in your control as well. And what I find to be fascinating about your story is, in many ways, what is being sold, you had.
Yep. Yep.
So, like, obviously you're synonymous with the huge physique. You're in Hollywood. You're in all these movies. You've done well for yourself, and so that is the message of like, if you get to that place and a woman tells you, "Hey, I'm gone," like, okay,
right.
So, what hit you that like you could have went down that path, but you had this like realization? What was it that made you have that realization?
Well, it was that question. Like, maybe it's me. Maybe it is me. Maybe I am the cause. You see what I mean? Like, there's cause and effect. The effect is her leaving. But I had misattributed the cause. The cause was she's not strong enough. It was always somebody else's thing, never me. And once I took total responsibility, I like to say this. There's something I say all the time. Every man in his life is a fool, a victim, or a king. And you're a fool because as you grow up, you're inevitably going to make mistakes. Nobody does it right. It's levels of accidents, levels of mistakes. Some are huge, some are very small, but you make these mistakes. And then as a victim, you can either brush it under the rug and you have all these excuses as to why you made these mistakes. And again, like I said, they're all valid. But a king, however, is responsible for his own court. Meaning you made a mistake, but it's up to you to correct those. Okay? It's your job to take out the wrong thinking and keep in the things that are right. My wife did nothing wrong. And that's what hit me. Because here I was, this woman the reason I had even been successful is because of her belief in me, her standing with me, her telling me everything that I needed to do. There were so many moments where I was going to give up. And she told me never give up. She told me I could do it. No one else was going to come with that. This is the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'm ready to just throw that away? And she did nothing wrong. You okay? But nothing but support me and love me for real. How could I? And that's where I was like, wait a minute, man, something's wrong here. Because this is not adding up. And I said, man, it's me. Damn it. Dude, it was like lights turning on. It was like thinking that you know, the sun goes around the earth. You know what I mean? And, oh no, dude, wait, no, we go around the sun.
Yeah.
And you go, now that's a whole nother frame of mind. But once you get that correct, now you can go to space. Now you can, you got the physics thing right. And now you can take steps to really go beyond.
Mm.
And I thought, man, the best advice I ever got was a friend of mine. He said, hey man, I can't promise you're going to get your wife and family back, but you need to get better for you. And now this is another concept that I had never heard of. And when you're talking about men, the concept of self-care was foreign.
Mm.
Like my father, he was a guy who believed in you worked until you died, even though you may cheat, you may do all kind of stuff, the image has to be a man must give up his body and sacrifice everything for the family, But the problem with that is that you never take care of yourself. You never ever, you don't, there's no healing, there's no recovery, there's no talking, there's no mental thinking, there's no therapy. It's all, we're just going to white knuckle this whole thing and grit our teeth and face the sun and wind and stand out, and the tornado just takes us, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
And I went to therapy for the first time. For the first time. That's when my wife left. And I started to examine. I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, what is the problem? Why? And man, the doors just started opening. And they've never stopped. Like every day, I'm discovering a new thing about myself. Every day. Every day. They say we contain multitudes, so to speak, but I am constantly discovering who I am. You don't know who you are. You have no idea until you start to examine all the doors and just keep going through those doors every day.
There's such a power in what you're saying, because on one level, I feel like a lot of people, and this is women too, but like there's this performative version of yourself. And then there's the self that you actually are, the self that you're discovering, the emotions, the feelings that are underneath this like sort of performance. I feel like we're reaching a tipping point with this conversation. I mean, last year, that show on Netflix, Adolescence, came out, and that won Golden Globes. And I mean, at the center of that was a conversation about masculinity. Yeah. And this was like a 12-year-old kid performing aggression, performing what he thought that he should be. Yeah. I remember in your memoir, you were talking about sort of this inner war between yourself. I think there were, there was a sensitive part of you. Yeah. And then the part of you that felt like you had to be big and tough and mean. Yeah. And I think a lot of these ideas that we buy into, it's like we're on borrowed time at some level of like pretending that like we're not sensitive. Mm-hmm. I think every man at their essence, there is a level of sensitivity. Maybe there's like a range, but if you go in and you like let yourself feel for the first time, could be such like a foreign experience.
Scary.
Yeah. So what was that inner war like for you between the tough and the sensitive?
Wow. You have to understand, like there are times when me and my wife, we lost children and I didn't cry. I wouldn't allow myself. There was, and you when you say performative, you're right. Because me being a young artist, painting, drawing, I would have my little portfolio and my thing, and I'll be on the way to school. But then I have to go through a group of drug dealers, a group of gang members, and they would, and I would have to perform, or you didn't want anybody grabbing your portfolio and pulling things out. And it was a thing where they would have, what is that? And you're like, none of your business. You know what I mean? Like, and I knew how to turn that on to survive.
Yeah.
Mind you, survival. It's very, very important. You know what I mean? Like, you have to get from A to B. And you're on the way to B, and you got to make it to B. And that's where I was at. And I knew I can't show any weakness. I can't show this, or they will hurt me. They will hurt me. And then I would remember getting into class and finding a few students I could really trust and geeking out about Star Wars and art. And I was like, wow, I was a totally different person. And I learned to be these people around different segments and different places. And you know what I mean? But the first time when I really, really, when it hit me, I'll never forget, man. I was out of therapy. Me and my wife were rebuilding our lives, right? And the movie Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman, and it came on television. And I sat there and watched it. And I couldn't stop crying. Dude, I couldn't stop crying. I mean, sobs. And I never cried like this. And I was sitting there just like, and I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why it was affecting me so much. And again, I think in hindsight, I could look back, and Morgan Freeman was protecting those kids. I saw myself like those kids. Just wanting to study, wanting to be creative, wanting to be smart. But there was the elements that were distracting and always bothering them. And I watched, he's like, lock the doors. And he kicked all those gang members out. And I'm just crying, man. I mean, just remembering this, like, oh. And that was me. And I needed him. I needed somebody like that. I didn't have it. So I had to create it. There's so many. By being an artist, I was looked at as weak. And I didn't want to show my talent because I thought it would be panned and it would be, and that's why I chose the athletic route just to survive. And I didn't even like football. That was the craziest thing about it. But it was a way to survive. And I thought that was going to be my way out. And that movie, watching that, my wife came in and she just saw me on the floor in tears. Like, she couldn't even say anything. And I didn't understand what was happening to me, man. That's the thing. I could be, it was like all my life, I was like, boom, boom, boom. I could be Terminator. It was like robot, do. And all of a sudden, it was like this flush of emotion. And I was scared, man. I was scared. I was afraid. Like, what is happening to me right now? And I was in touch with how I really was feeling. Because with men, I had to, like recently I had a motion wheel. And I had to grab an emotion wheel and say, oh no, I feel slightly embarrassed right now. or I feel insulted. But the only emotion that we're allowed to show is anger. So it didn't matter about the will. For men, it was just immediately anger. And, people are trying to understand but that was my go-to. And I was angry at my wife. I was angry at my kids. I was angry at my people. And I was like revenge. I was vengeful. I'm going to get everybody back. I'm going to show you. And that makes you very, very successful. A lot of this revenge is about getting people back who doubted you. You know what I mean? It was like first of all, and when you're talking about the manosphere and you're talking about men, hey man, revenge is better than sex. Straight up. You can go to a revenge movie. Guys are like, this is the best film of all. You want to get back anybody that ever doubted you, ever did anything wrong to you. If you could get them back one by one, slowly, make them die slowly. It's a fantasy that's better than sex. And the problem with that is that it takes you right into the gutter. Meaning, to get revenge, you got to go back.
Why is that so compelling, revenge?
I think it's part of the story. I think it's part of it's a way of avenging the embarrassment and every other uncomfortable emotion you've ever felt in your life. If anyone's ever made you feel less than, because we all want to know we're worthy. We all want to know that we're valuable. We all want to know we're good. And when something, anything, anyone makes you feel less than good, less than valuable, you want to correct that. You know what I mean? Everyone here has been slighted, has been insulted, I remember we first moved to LA and I had a landlady and me and my wife were coming home and we caught this lady coming out of our house. And we're like, what are you doing? And she had a key and she came out and coming out the front door. It's like, hey, it's our house. We rent it from you, and she was like, well, whatever, and blew it off. And I said, hold up. And so she goes home to her place, and I drive over there like, ma'am, you can't come in our house. And she spits in my face. Now, mind you, this is a level of insult that is it says, if you can spit in someone's face purposefully, it says you are nothing. This is what revenge is. Revenge is, all right, I have fantasies of choking. This is how you can kill somebody. Because immediately, I wipe my face and I want to kill this lady. This is revenge. And thank God I didn't. And again, this is way before I was famous. I was working security. And I went home and I couldn't believe, I felt like the dirtiest because I felt worthless. And so we called the police. And what was crazy, the police came and I told them what happened. And they said, well, no, she called the police on you. This is why we're here. And here I am, a black man in Burbank. And I'm going, oh, Lord. And we're here to arrest you. She said you attacked her. And I had the genius idea. I said, you know what, sir? I said, okay, I'll go to jail with you. but you have to arrest her too, because I have the same accusation. So let's both go to jail, but you have to take her too. And they went, we won't do that. Now, if I'd acted any other way, I was going to jail. But the point is, when you're talking about revenge, when you're talking about that, you're talking about every slight. You know, that's why it feels good. And men, you know, one thing I know for a fact is that men, they need love, but they much rather have respect. You understand? Listen, both men and women both need love and respect. But more than love, with the way people, they need it. We need love, everything. But man, if you don't love me, you better respect me. You know? And that lack of respect is a big deal to a lot of men.
There's so many very public, it's just striking a chord with me about revenge and respect and the very public displays that we see of that today, you know, with powerful figures and you can just live your life, I guess, with kind of this checklist.
Yeah.
Okay, they're going to go there, and I'm going to put them on the list, and them on the list, and them on the list. And it's almost like subconsciously you have all these people on your list of what you're going to do to get back that power that they, I guess, you thought that they took from you,
yep.
or the disrespect that they put on your name.
Yep.
And it's like it's a very heavy way to live, with that sort of need for vindication of oneself.
Can I tell you how it changed for me?
Yeah.
When I knew I was already valuable. The moment I realized, it's weird because you don't know that. You know, you determine your worth by what everybody else says, or what everybody else thinks, or what job you have, or whether you're fired or not, or whether you stayed on and someone else got picked. In Hollywood, it's like they cast this person, but you didn't get it. So I'm a little bit less. In sports, you know, I know so many athletes that if they win, they become the win. But the problem with becoming your wins is that you inevitably have to become your losses. I know many, many guys that once they stop playing, put a gun to their head. Happens too much. Happens so many times. Or they drink themselves to death. A lot of guys out of the military, they don't know where you were a winner. Now you're a loser. But I had to understand that none of that had anything to do with my worth as a human being. None of that. And then I had to understand too that, first of all, there's ways to get rid of shame. Like the shame of shame doesn't say you did a bad thing. Shame says you are bad. You are bad. And constantly hearing that, it's like water seeks its own level. It's going to go down. If you dress a pig up and put it in a suit, it's going to go back to the slop. If you think you're a pig, no matter how good you dress up, you're going to go do pig things. And once I started to change my mentality about who I was, I said, wait a minute, I'm not bad. I'm not bad. And the way I did this, and listen, it takes work, because the world runs on making you feel like you're bad. That's how people make money, by making you feel like you don't have enough.
Yeah.
Your car's not good enough. Your clothes aren't this and that. There's something you're missing. If you only had, listen, I've been in, I swear, I go to casting and you go to casting agent, they're like, can you levitate? I'm like, I'll try. We thought you could levitate. Sorry. Dude, you can't do this. There's things you can't do. There's things that it's impossible. But they'll never tell you that. And now I realize, damn it, it's the trick. Don't go by that. Literally, just know who you are. Know and believe that you are viable. You're good. Don't take the shame. You know what I mean? Don't take that, because you get shamed on things you shouldn't be shamed for. You know what I mean? And that changed everything for me, man. And I started to be like, I could say what I wanted to say. And then I started saying things that I remember just saying stuff that normally I wouldn't say. And people were like, whoa, hey, what? I was like, I'm human, man.
That moment with the Morgan Freeman movie, Lean on Me, it feels like when you explain that, like just a well opened up in you that just exploded. And so
go back.
What was it like, if that was an explosion of emotion, or a release in some ways? What was it like to carry the bottled upness for many years?
It was a huge weight. I mean, for me, it's exhausting being two people. You know, carrying you literally are this person in public, and then you go home, and I'll never forget how the young actor came to me one time and he says, "Man, how do you keep up your image?" And I said, "Man, you don't have one. You just can't have one. But keeping up an image is hard. Keeping up an image is heavy. And it weighs more every day. Every day. Imagine it's 8 pounds one day. It gets 10 pounds. And then in 10 years, it's 400 pounds. And you're trapped. I like to say, there are people who are homeless in the street and they live under a bridge. But there are very, very successful people that live under bridges that they own. It's the same stuff. Success can be a problem because it's the image. And now the image is heavy. I mean, hey man, all you gotta do, you look at the Epstein files and you see all these people who carrying images. And the reality was totally different.
Yeah.
And people are just now like, whoa. This thing about right now, more than ever, everyone's seeing what you thought was cool was not. All the docudramas of what we thought was great. Yeah. It wasn't. What we thought this was but because we're witnessing the image fall apart. We're witnessing that. But people think, well, now we know this, right? But the job now has changed into now it's just now everyone has their own private images to uphold. Now you have your own Instagram, and now you tailor your own image. And yeah, we're in the private jet, and they're not even in the air. Now you crap your image. And you can create your own weight. And I'm like, man, we got to get rid of this, man. The only way to really, really deal with it is to be real with yourself. And that's where I am every day. It's just, listen, and you know what? And I say this because it's so wild to me. It's a different way of being. It's considering the fact that I was unfaithful to my wife at one time, and we were rebuilding and the whole thing. And there are times when I have to be very, very honest about how I'm feeling, even with her. And there's times she doesn't agree. She's like, hey, you were wrong about this. I said, I don't think I was. And see, because you're the guilty party or because you've done bad or whatever, you feel like, man, do you still get the right to say these things? You better. You better. Because, or else you build a new image. You'll build if I don't honestly say how I'm feeling, do I agree with everything she says? No. And I said, we don't agree, but that's okay. But what happens is you overcorrect. Where now it's like, as men, we're going to just do whatever anybody wants. And it's like, no, let's just be honest. Let's just, dude.
I think that's the overcorrection is what people might have an issue with.
Right.
Which I think that you articulating it perfectly of like, there's a middle ground. And I mean, you're choosing honesty and choosing vulnerability and you're choosing this release. And then, on the other end, when, going through your story, I mean, there was just so much anger that was like the polar opposite of that, living with such anger the story that might have hit me the most in your book was the of pent up anger was the Christmas from hell. Could you explain what happened there?
I can, man. My father had been abusing my mother for years. And along with that kiss that I gave my dad when I was little, one of the other memories I had is him knocking my mother out. And I was helpless. For one, I looked, I felt like I couldn't protect her and I wanted to. And he was so powerful, so big and strong, and it was his world. And I was about 30 years old, and I had just started in entertainment. I was doing a show called Battle Dome, and I played in NFL, but I started to do Hollywood. And I came back home and brought my family home for Christmas. And my father really reacted. And Christmas is one of those days, it was one of those periods where alcoholics really, really act up. I mean, I don't know, that's a whole nother theory, but with the drinking and the memories of Christmas, something about that, he started to drink. He had spent some years dry, but then he started drinking again. So, but I'm an adult now. And I'm married. I bring my kids there, and I make him promise me. I'm like, look, man, don't act up, because I'm coming home with my kids. My kids have never seen anything weird. Okay, so, and I have 5 kids, but this was a while ago, and but they were little. The little ones were little, and me and my wife were going to dinner in Detroit. Driving from Flint to Detroit, and I got a call. And it was from my aunt who said, hey, we call my father Big Terry. And he said, Big Terry just hit Trish in front of your kids. In front of my kids? In front of everybody. He hit her so hard that her front tooth is knocked sideways. Now, you got to understand, man, I'm not a 5-year-old. I'm not a baby anymore. I said, get the kids out of the house, get everybody out of the house. I told my wife, I dropped my wife. She was in the car. We turned around. I dropped her off at my aunt's house. And I went over there. And I looked at him, and I confronted him, and everybody was gone. And I said, dude, what did I tell you? And he looked at me like, man, fuck you. And I unleashed. I hit this man. And, you know, when I say anger, there's a blackout, you know, and I think there's a lot of men out there who know what I mean. You don't feel anything. You don't feel pain. You have to check yourself later. Like, am I bleeding? I don't know. I don't feel anything. Like, there's times I got into fights and I was like, oh yeah, there was a cut. You can break stuff. You break bones. You don't feel a thing. Because you're just, it takes over. And that's where I was, man. I beat him all over the house. He ran up in his room, and I remember kicking the door down, beating him some more. And he was begging. And all of a sudden, it was like one last hit, and I thought, this is it. Like, this is the fulfillment. This is the revenge that I always wanted. And it was going to be sweet. This is where I'm going to make you pay for all the times I was scared, for all the times I was embarrassed, for all that, for you looking at me the way you looked at me years ago. He was on the list.
Yeah.
He was on the list. I'm going to show you. There were times he doubted me, man. There were times he would tell me, you ain't playing no football. I said, man, leave me alone. We had a very acrimonious, and it was a very acrimonious relationship, okay? I don't know what it was. But I remember that when I was done, and I thought there was going to be this satisfaction. It was empty. It was nothing. It was totally nothing. I just felt hollow. And it's not what I expected. See, I was like, wait a minute, man. Somebody's cheating me out of my revenge right now. Because this is supposed to feel good. This is supposed to be where it all gets settled. And what happened is, I realized I was just like him. I was just like him. I went right into the dirt, and beating on him didn't do anything. And I left, and it scared me. Like, it scared me, man, because I was like, that was supposed to be a moment, and it was nothing. I didn't come back for 10 years. It was crazy. That's when I learned this revenge stuff. Doesn't work. It doesn't.
When I read about that story, the thing that actually hit me the most was it was not the rage, but it seemed like you were in tears after that whole thing
I was told, dude, I was crying for me. I was crying for him. I was crying for what just happened.
Yeah.
Like, a man is never meant to lay hands on his parents. You know, it's just not, it was unnatural. It was weird. It was, I felt dirty. I felt filthy. I felt worse. I was in tears, and I was done. Like, and you know what I like to say? It wasn't even like sobbing. It was just angry tears. Like, now you got me here. You know, it was, not only did you beat up my mother, now I'm nothing. I didn't know how to handle it, man. I didn't know what was happening to me. Like, I had no definition. I wasn't in therapy. You know, I couldn't even define what happened. That's where I was at that moment. It wasn't until years later when I did go to therapy and I started to understand what was happening. What is so cool to me to go back in hindsight in therapy and start to examine all these moments in my life, all these things. And I went back and I realized this revenge thing didn't work. And one thing I knew I had to do was forgive him, which I thought was impossible, which I thought would never, ever happen. But I said, the way I did it, I said, let me think of one thing that I can thank him for. And so I called him and I said, Big Terry, thank you for having me. That's what we called him, Big Terry. I said, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't exist. Thank you. And he cried and he apologized. I couldn't believe it. I was like, all that, the hitting, all this stuff didn't do it. And I realized, whoa, this forgiveness thing, it's deep. I didn't excuse him, but I forgave him. And it's so powerful, man, that it cracked his heart. Because even he couldn't believe what he was hearing. And I went, see, when you're talking about being tough, that's why I call my book tough. When you talk about being vulnerable, forgiveness is peak. Peak. How tough do you have to be to forgive people? You know? How tough are you to say what your vulnerabilities are? You know what I mean? How tough is it to actually tell that, hey, wait, let's get rid of the image. And this is what I honestly am right now. That's a level of toughness that you don't see in the NFL. You don't see it as, life. This is what toughness is. And I figured that's the kind of toughness I wanted to have.
It's amazing because, the tears of watching that movie, the tears in the rage in that moment, and then the tears of your father. Like if you were to pull the manosphere today, I mean, tears is like the last thing that you need to show. And yet the well of that's like coming out in those moments, but not just from you, but from him as well. Yeah. It shows so profoundly what is like buried underneath for a lot of men, that like if they let themselves go there, like what would come out. And I imagine that's like surprising to some people when that starts coming up, because you've learned to deal with your emotions and you learn to deal with the world in such a different way, all while kind of erasing that authentic, true self of being in tune with that,
I know what my purpose is, now, because in practice, like I said, it's all about the habits. It's all about the customs and the precedents. Because I practice being this way, I know my purpose is in assisting and showing this kind of vulnerability. But because let me tell you, I have so many men. They said, man, I didn't even know it was possible until I saw you do it. And I'm very, very thankful to be in this place. It's bigger than movies. It's bigger than entertainment. It's bigger than all the other things I've done, because I look at the youth coming up. I look at my son. I look at his friends. When I was young, everyone was looking at the blaxploitation movie. But there was no other way to look. There was nothing else out there. And now I do see men that are being vulnerable. Now I do see forgiveness. Now I do see there are a lot of men out there. And a lot of, the manosphere is a reaction. But I also see a lot of good men that have decided, I don't want to go that way. And those are the people that I've, a lot of times you don't hear about it because, bad news travels fast. So everybody wants to hear about the Tates and this and that and that. But there's a whole infrastructure of good people who are supporting each other. I just had a phone call yesterday with a young man who I knew from years ago. And he was like, man, we've been through some of the same things. And we talked for about an hour, just like, I said, man, this is one thing I said, can you believe we're actually having this conversation? I said, because back when we knew each other back in the day, we could never talk like this. How refreshing is that? You couldn't bring it up. You'd be laughed out of the room. But the fact that we can have this conversation, man, I really am hopeful. I really feel like it's going to get better and better and better. I am a glass half full dude because I'm at war with cynicism. I'm at war with it. There's I love comedy. Good comedy is awesome. But I also see where it's turned into cynicism, where everybody has this belief everything's going to be bad. Everything's going to tear up. I don't believe that. I just don't.
What you're talking about, and I think your entire posture and the realizations and revelations that you've had, I think is just so important. I think it's so profound. And for that reason, the one thing I can't shake is, you said this at the very beginning of the interview, you said that during the Me Too thing, there were some men that called you a cuck. And that's weird to me because everything that you're saying right now just feels so authentic and genuine and healthy. What was it about that time period and what happened that people were, at least men were calling you that?
Well, it was, what was crazy is that, people doubted the fact that I could be sexually assaulted. And, I had been in therapy. I had learned how to deal with my emotions and not react in rage, which saved me during that moment when I had this agent who, for some reason, decided he was going to molest me in front of a ton of people. And I was there with my wife and I was like, what are you doing? And then everyone was like, well, did you push him off? I was like, of course I pushed him off. I said, hey, what are you doing? He came back. I said, hey, stop. And again, remember I go back to when my landlady spit in my face, And this is where I admire women on so many levels because, with men, what we can fight our way out of a lot of situations. But women have to think their way out of a lot of situations, And I began to learn how to think my way through situations where I could have just punched this guy, knocked him out, did whatever. But the problem was, would anyone have believed me? I don't think they would have. Because the thing is he's a big time agent and, Terry Crews knocks out this agent at a party and I could say, hey, he grabbed me, he grabbed my privates. And they would be like, no, that's not it. You're just big, strong, you got angry. But by me not doing that, everyone was like, what's the story? Why didn't he kill him? Why didn't he just destroy this man? He obviously can kill somebody. Look at it. And that's where the cuck thing came about. Like, what is going on? What's the story? It 1 + 1, this don't equal up. People had all this stuff. They were like, he had a prior relationship with this guy. And I was like, man, I didn't know this dude at all. And I said, dude, what happened was when the women started to come out about what was happening. And I was on Twitter and I heard all these men saying, oh, see, that's what you have to do to get into Hollywood and the whole thing. Now all these women are whining and complaining, and they were made famous by this. And now you want to turn on this guy. And I was like, that's not it at all. That's not it at all. And this is the strange thing. Again, when you talk about facts, you don't get paid to tell. You get paid for silence. The moment you say anything, there's no money. There's zero. The moment anyone comes out about any of it, you're not getting any money.
It's the washing the hands story.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's what the payments are for. You know what I mean? But as soon as you open it up, there's no money. So all this accusation that these people are looking for some payday, I knew was false because I said, that's me. And then I felt like, wait a minute. If I don't join it, I would not be truly an honest person to let this go. Because I know this happened to me. And they know this happened to me. I went right to them. But I did these tweets that described exactly what happened and why we should believe these women who came forward about these assaults that happened. Because I got assaulted. And so men everywhere was like, why is he joining with these women? But I knew. That's when I mentioned the fact that I could not in control of the image anymore.
Yeah.
And I didn't care anymore. That's the kind of stuff I was talking about. Is when I joined the Me Too movement and just said, hey man, Me Too. I understand.
I think the most dangerous thing is that any man could come away with a picture of that situation and think that is a symbol of weakness.
Right.
When honestly, like you're acting within control. You had this quote that really struck me. You said, anytime you're acting out of anger, you are not in control. You're allowing yourself to be provoked. To be filled with anger and rage is to be powerless and weak. A lot of men have that backwards.
Yeah.
And to have hit this agent, which again, like he's this little guy, like you would have just torn him to shreds, but you would have been doing the same thing that you did with your dad. That's and right. Getting that revenge.
Weak.
Yeah.
Weak. But I felt strong by not doing that. And again, I got to give it up to my wife because she was there the whole time, man. I was driving home and she was holding me. She just kept patting me at my knee like, I'm proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Because she knows how I was. She knows. I was throwing people over her head. And she's like, yo, what are you doing? And listen, the way I used to deal with stuff, man, if I didn't win, I'd turn the table over. But that's no way to deal with life, man. That's no way. And it's a whole different way. I'm thankful, man. I'm the most grateful man on earth. I feel that way. Because could have been a path that I never got this. I look at those days, I look at the days and I go, man, thank God that I was able to see.
It seems like Viktor Frankl had an impact on you, and he has that famous quote about stimulus and response.
Dude, Viktor, I mean, when he talks about you having a choice no matter what, that was one of the quotes that I loved about him, whether I want to get it right.
There's something about between stimulus and response, there's space.
There's a space there's a space in which you have a choice to make. And a lot of guys feel like they have no choice. But you always have a choice. Always have a choice. And this is funny. And somebody says this, but what if someone put a gun to your head? You still got a choice. The choice is still yours. Live or die. But that's your choice. And no one can ever, ever take your choice away. And I think that's a brilliant way of thinking. A brilliant way. Because what I learned as a young man was that as a man, your job was to control everything around you. But here I am at 57, and I realize that the job is to control everything about me. Like I said, the sun doesn't go around us. We go around the sun.
Yeah.
Control everything about yourself. That's where and listen, when you look at the Alcoholics Anonymous and you look at 12 steps, and it's about what you can control and what you can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's wisdom. You become wise when you know that you can control yourself. I can't control you. I can't control people. I can't control environments.
Yeah.
I can't control the weather, but I can control everything that happens, that the way I respond to any given situation or circumstance.
We've kind of been circling around the question of what healthy masculinity is, and I think what happened to you in this whole situation is one of the clearest examples, and you also defined it in a way that I hadn't quite heard before. You wrote, "The purpose of being tough is not to attack, but to protect. The purpose of being strong is not to dominate, but to support. The purpose of having power is not to rule, but to serve. What I've learned is that to be a true man is to be the ultimate servant. With any talent or advantage that life has given you, whether by birth or by circumstance, your duty is to use that advantage in the service of others."
That's right. That's right. I believe that with my whole heart. That's the Terry Crews log line right there, man. I've been given a lot. And just even telling their story is a service. Believe me, I've been inspired by other people who were telling their story, and just totally was like, it changed the way I saw the world. And just by using every advantage that you have to serve other people. It's beautiful, man. It's a beautiful life.
And there's no shortage of opportunities to do that. I mean, you have done so many things in your life, right? We were chatting a little bit off camera about how people can come to define themselves not in a certain particular way. I mean, it's not just about being a man or what a man means, but your own self-worth. And so I feel like if you're taking this expansive definition of masculinity and then thinking about practical application, I mean, you've been in the NFL, you've been an actor, you've been a speaker, you're here speaking on this podcast, you're an author, have a new children's book coming out. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can serve other people in your family as well.
Yes.
So tell me about that. Tell me about like the multi-dimensional aspect of it, one's identity.
Yeah. First off, I mean, when you look at what it means to serve, you're talking about this. It's the only thing that keeps us human. You know what I mean? Like for me, if everything was just for our own advantage, this world would disintegrate. There's no way anything would happen. We would all just be burning everyone else's home. It would all just go up in flames. But anytime you're talking about the essence of society, it's man serving another person. And how we serve is so important. What we do, I look at, it's funny because everything is a measure of service, so to speak, you know. And I know that, again, this is one thing that a lot of people, you know, tend to put on the image. Like they say, well, you didn't do this and this and that. And it's a way to equate different people. But listen, first of all, I make funny movies, made people laugh. And that's a service. I've had people come to me, and this is one of the things that affected me. I mean, literally, it's one of the deepest things that ever happened to me. This young lady came to me and she said, Terry, I want to just tell you about my brother. He died at the time, she said he died like 5 years ago. But what we would do, he was sick. And what we would do is watch all your films and we would just laugh. Mm. And he had all your movies and all your things in a box. And he loved you. And she said, every time I pull out one of those movies from the box, it's a premiere for my brother. And I remember giving her a hug and I just said, thank you. Thank you for letting me know I served you in that way. And I served him. It's deep, man. I mean, it could be as little as serving somebody a meal. It could be as little as just doing a great job at whatever it is you're doing. Just a little extra. People forget, man. Like, you don't get paid for just the job. You get paid for all the other stuff. Everything over and above. You know? And that's, when I just look at that, I look at how important it really is. This is another thing we haven't really tapped on. I think in a capitalistic society, you see people taking advantage of other people.
Yeah.
You see people who are either you owe me or this, and you can go the other way where it's either too capitalistic or it's all socialist, where everybody, you know, yours is mine and mine is yours. But where does service lie? On both of those ends. It's right in the middle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, as capitalist as you can be, as socialist as you can be, whatever, but service is in the middle. Both of those don't operate unless somebody is serving another person. There's deep honor in that.
What strikes me is that when that whole incident happened, right? I mean, you're taking tremendous risk professionally, right? So this idea of having like, there's many ways to serve many, many hats. What was that like? Because, I mean, you're in some ways at the peak of your career, you know, big movie franchises. In some ways there's so much to relate to women, like you were saying, of if I just shut up and I don't do this, I get to continue on the path that I'm on in some way. And if I do this, maybe one of those kind of sources to serve, or one of those sources of my identity is going to be affected in some way. What was the sort of thoughts that were going through your head around that?
I felt like Hollywood was over. I felt like there was a moment I was like, that's it. Now, but I want to mention this. Years earlier, I came forward about my own pornography addiction.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal, right? So everyone was like, what is he doing? What is that? No one knew what that was. And listen, even to this day, people deny it's not in the DSM. It's not, people could say, well, you physically can't be addicted to pornography. That's scientifically, it's not diagnosed.
That makes no sense, but yeah.
But all I'm saying is I couldn't stop. Hey, I had no control. I would say, I'm not doing this, and I was doing it. And so I came forward. And like I told you, it was about burning the boats. It was about making sure I never went back. Because I didn't want to become this other person, the old person. So I had already had a little bit of practice in facing this sort of weird, what's wrong with him? You know, because that was the look I got. Like, oh my. And at the time, I was doing a ton of things. I want to give a shout out to, like, I was doing a big Old Spice campaign. And I remember they were like, no, we got to let him go. And I said, I understand. You didn't sign up for that.
Why? Why would they let you go?
Because it was, no one had heard of it. They were like, pornography addiction? Like, there's something wrong with this. And my agent called and they said we're now thinking about redoing the campaign. And I said, hey, I understand. See, now you would say, why? But at the time, it was the negative publicity.
Yeah.
Old Spice didn't want that. And I understood that. They didn't sign up for that. They just wanted somebody to sell soap, you know? Not this. We didn't know this. I said, you're right. I said, I completely understand if you want to move on. But that's the decision I had to make, where I was like, I have to decide, is it for my health? Or am I going to get better? Or am I going to continue to not be healthy just for the sake of the image? And that was the first time I made that decision. That second time was Me Too. And I said, I got to do it again. I knew. I said, these poor women were being literally led through the streets and flogged. And I said, I can't let this happen. Like, because it happened to me. Like, for me to be quiet, I would feel like a farce. I would feel like a fake. If I just stay quiet and I let them be lambasted and dogged out, and it's like, I went out in the street with them. Let's all get flogged.
What has it been? I mean, that was, 2018, 2017, 2018. What has it been like in the years since with Hollywood?
With me, it was very, very strange for a long time. There was another Expendables movie I was supposed to do. I lost that.
This is in 2018, 2019,
yes.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people who were like, dude, you are really, really wrecking your career right now. I lost so much. Just there was a lot of things that people wanted to do stuff with me who weren't even touching me. I went into rooms and half the room was like, hi. And the other side of the room was like, bye. And it was obvious. And that was weird. And that was really strange. But I was okay with that. Like, for the first time in my life, I was like, this is honest. See, it was refreshing, actually, because you're not hearing any people who like you was actually say it. People who didn't like you, you knew it. And that was really cool. I was like, wow, babe. Me and my wife, we were like, yeah, we know now. But also, there were the people who were like, Terry, I love the fact you did that. I have an opportunity for you. So, and I want to say this too, because I chose to correct and not criticize, I was able to continue my career. Because what happens is I've seen where people get bitter and people get mean, and then people start blaming other people, and people start bringing everybody into it. And well, you were there and you didn't know, and it's like, hey man, and it starts to be accusatory toward everybody, whoever I did. First of all, the agency was William Morris Endeavor.
It's like number one.
Huge.
Yeah.
If I'd have put every actor and actress in William Morris Endeavor on blast for not protecting me, it'd have been like, dude, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I knew that would have been critical. But I said, no. I said, this guy can't do this. That's where I said, this man cannot keep his job and put his hands on the clients. And I kept it right where it needed to be, on the perpetrator. And all of a sudden people were like, okay, good. And I was able to continue. And not only was my career able to continue, it blew up. It went beyond. I did not expect it. I went home fully expecting Hollywood to be over. And I think everyone was waiting for this critical Terry, he now doesn't like anyone, and but I didn't do that because I love the business. We came here for a dream, man. Going in front of the Senate and talking about the Survivors' Bill of Rights was, and I mentioned the fact that everyone came out to Hollywood for a dream, and that dream gets played because they know you want it. And they totally use that in order to take advantage of a situation. And the fact that you won't tell, and the fact that you feel like you'll be out of here. And the fact is, that's the threat. And the irony is, if you confront that right where it is, you're free from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to say what you feel, and that you don't feel right, or you don't want this, or that you were misused or taken advantage of. And I did not expect for my career to continue, but it did. And that, like I mentioned earlier, is why I am the most grateful man. I'm the most grateful. You're never going to find anybody with more gratitude than me. Very thankful. It's like, not only do I still get to live this, do this, the level keeps getting higher, and the things keep getting better. And I feel like it comes from serving people. When you do the service right, because that's what my heart is. My heart was not to gain for me. My heart was to like, well, man, I got to back these ladies up. And we can't let this go on. We can't.
Talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, because we talked about how you relate to your emotions, vulnerability, honesty, service, purpose, identity. I feel like the place that we didn't cover, I want to land on is about women, because like that is such a big part of how a man relates to his own masculinity. And you had such a sense of solidarity as a man with droves of women who were also exposing these realities that were happening behind the scenes. And so how did you look at women before all of these realizations, and how do you look at them now?
You know what? I don't even want to say how I looked at women. It was how I treated my wife. It was one woman who determined, because I knew I didn't do her right. You know what I mean? I knew my attitude was wrong. I knew that I believed that I was worth more than her simply because I was a man. And that was no longer true. And I went, snap. That's me. Like, And I didn't need to look at all the women on earth. I knew how I did my wife. And the way she would talk to me, like, you talk to me like I'm beneath you. She never, ever played it safe with me. Like, she always told me the real. She always told me honestly what she was feeling. And I said, man. And then when all this happened with the agency and the whole thing, my wife told me, she said, there's not a woman in your life that hasn't been through what you just went through.
Yeah.
What? She told me about stories while she was a teenager and boss comes up behind her and feels her up. And she has to ignore it. Remember I told you about them thinking their way out of situations? And I went, imagine. Then I started to imagine, like, wow. Like, my wife coming forward about that, about these stories, and men dogging her out. You know what I mean? And I didn't have to look at the whole, it was like, my wife gave me every bit of the perspective that I needed from a woman's point of view. Personally, discreetly, I knew her heart. And she was like, Terry, she said, man, if you only knew your mother, your daughters, me, we've all had that happen to us.
Well, what did you have to unlearn about what it means to be a man or masculinity for your relationship to actually work?
This idea of, that I was more valuable. That was the real crux. Because I would think that, no, we're equal. But all my actions said differently. Like, I had to, my way or the highway. It was this, if I didn't get the last word, she was somehow in breach, And that changed. That was the unlearning. And it's funny because my wife still says, she said, you're a recovering chauvinist. And I said, I'm always recovering. But this is what I love. And when you talk about recovery, and sometimes some people say if they had an addiction or whatever and they're in recovery, it sounds kind of sad. Like, I'm recovering. But what's so beautiful about the term recovery is that it means to get something back. You are finding your treasure. Something that was stolen from you. You're getting it back. A lot of times that attitude stole my relationship with my wife. It stole the relationship I had with all the women in my life. My mother, sister, daughters. It stole things that now, because of this reframing and because of the way I see, wait a minute, no. Your opinion, your mindset, everything about you is just as valid as I am. In fact, when you're right, you are right. How about when I know you're right, I say you're right? Because before, there were times I knew she was right and I wouldn't admit it because it just doesn't look good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But now it's like, babe, whatever you want. You take the lead on this one. I'm going to do what you say because you're right here. You know more about this than I do. You understand this more than I do. And there's so many, listen, there are times she looked at me and she said, sure, really? I said, listen, call me on it. If you feel like if there's any way I'm going back on this, tell me. Because again, there's habits and old things. So I had to be like, and that was all part of regaining my trust, regaining her trust. One thing people don't understand is love is unconditional. Love is unconditional. Love everybody. I love everybody unconditionally. Trust is all conditional. Anybody who's trying to get unconditional trust, trying to rob you. And I was expecting unconditional trust from my wife. And I had to be like, wait a minute. In order to correct this, I had to she had to give me the conditions on which I could regain her trust. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do all these things. And it rebuilt our marriage, rebuilt our relationship. I can honestly say our relationship is better than it's ever been, at a level of honesty that I don't think we ever would have reached had we not gone through the what we call D-Day.
What do you think is so? Because there's a relinquishing of control there that you're explaining. There's to be able to say to a woman or your wife, "Hey, oh, okay, that's your opinion. What do you think? Okay, we'll go with that." Or there's an invitation in that is collaborative rather than coercive or domineering. What do you think it is about control in a relationship that feels so intoxicating to men and so threatening to even be in that situation where you would give it up?
Well, this is goes back to the authoritarian way of being raised, where it's obey. Don't ask. As a kid, when I was growing up in the 70s, it's, you're better seen and not heard. Don't speak up, don't talk back, you just obey. But then there's the authoritative way of living where you're listened to and your opinion matters and you're actually asked, what do you think about this? Like I said, coercion is not leadership. And leadership is literally being able to listen to people who know more than you. That makes a great leader.
Yeah.
He has people who know more. We got a guy who reads the map. He knows more about that than I do. What do we do? Where do we go? And a great leader we have a woman here who knows way more about this than I do. What should we do in this situation? And I think, as men, you want to be viewed as this leader. You want to be this guy, but sometimes you got to be quiet and follow. And this is a great example of this too. It's like, I've been in places where I have security person. And, I pay the guy and he's an employee or whatever, but there's times he's like, hey man, sit in the car. Don't move. And it's for my own safety. It's like, hey, I have to listen. Because if I was like, hey man, you work for me, I'm going to, and all of a sudden, there's a very big danger. And
yeah.
But imagine that there's a point where, it could save your life. And I think that we've got this whole thing kind of convoluted. I think it's been romanticized and it's been put in movies and stuff that doesn't, like, again, man, people get shot in movies and live and keep going. But in real life, nobody lives, and when you look at this whole thing, get out of the film and get out of the movie, stop romanticizing this thing and start to understand, wait a minute, maybe you don't know it all. How about she lead it? And this is the way me and my wife go all day now. Literally, like, there's times when she'll defer and say, I want you to tell me where we're going to go here. And then that's like, okay, now what do we do here, babe? How are we making this move? And it's a partnership.
It's collaborative.
I say authoritative because sometimes she's the authority. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it makes it, and opinions and people, and it's beautiful. Listen, this did not exist when I was a kid. It just didn't. My father would beat my mother. The police would come and they would say, hey man, don't beat her so hard next time. It's police. She's she's bleeding. She's got beat up. And they're like, hey, just calm it down. Imagine you couldn't even get help from the authorities. You knew you were on your own. At first, I remember thinking about my mother, and I was like, why didn't she leave? And this and this. And then after years, I had a whole different revelation, man. She was the only thing keeping everything together.
Well, Terry, I mean, you've given so much today, both for men and women, to think about. So many nuggets of wisdom. And I just find myself so profoundly impacted by some of the things that you're saying. And it's not just something to aspire to, but to embody for the people that are listening. And so my last question really is maybe for a man that's listening and they're sort of being convinced or intoxicated by some of these age-old ideas within the manosphere. Maybe they're in a similar type mindset that you were once at. What would you say to that person who's in it right now?
I would say, to anybody, and this is to everyone, I would say not more so just the manosphere, but to everyone. Watch who is steering your emotions. Remember, I know for a fact, if I look at a post and I'm angry, I am immediately being steered. This is a technique. This is years of psychology, and you don't even know what's happening to you. To me, it's like running into a flock of birds, and the birds go flying into the freeway and they all get hit by a truck. You're one of the birds. Understand, when you see a post that says, you're not angry enough, watch out. You're being steered. You are being manipulated. This is to everyone. It's just so the people who in the manosphere are responsible for these kind of things, they know how to get your goat, so to speak. They know the words to say. They're smarter than you. And it's a technique. It's smooth. It's sleight of hand. It's one of those things. There's a long word. It's called prestidigitation. A lot of people call it the prestige. It's a magician. They get you looking over here, and something is happening behind you. And I just want you to understand that it doesn't take a lot for you to be radicalized. It just doesn't. Because they can push every button. It's the same thing with, it's what pornography knows. There's certain things, and with AI, different things are getting better.
Yeah.
Techniques are getting better. Subtle ways of bending your brain. People know how to push that button. And I'm here to tell you, please, 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 when you feel at your most angry, you are being manipulated. Stop and examine what's really happening. And that's for everyone. Because I've seen there's a manosphere, and then there's a sphere in politics, then there's a sphere of angry over this, angry over that, and this and this. I mean, you can find a million ways to get angry.
Yeah. And
know that there's a mission behind all this stuff, and somebody's getting paid. To me, it reminds me of a UFC fight or MMA fight. Those guys are fighting for $5,000 max and going straight to the hospital.
Yeah.
And somebody just made a fortune.
Oof.
So please understand that.
Mm.
First of all, there's no better example of the manosphere than a UFC fight, where this guy's fighting for his pride, and he's going to deal with the repercussions of getting his brain beat out for the rest of his life. And someone else just got paid.
Mm.
So just think of it that way and understand what's happening. And you'll slowly start to see, wait a minute, let me pull back and let me examine what's really happening to me right now.
Mm.
And you'll find, I said, get yourself an emotion wheel. You know what I mean? Like I did. And I was like, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling confused. But I had mixed that up with anger. But I said, no, wait. I'm just confused. So what do? You get unconfused. Find out. Ask. And all of a sudden, I don't have to be angry. I can just get things clear. It's an amazing thing, but it takes a bit of work. But just stop. Stop for 1 second.
Powerful. So great. Well, thank you, Terry, for being here. I really enjoyed this.
Oh man, I'm glad you had me here.
Yeah.
This is another way to serve, man. Another way.